Welcome back to the Veteran Teacher Files. I'm your host, the Dragon Lady. There's a scene in the documentary, Waiting for Superman, where they describe something called the Dance of the Lemons. It's this idea that some school districts, instead of firing a bad teacher, will quietly help them transfer somewhere else, pass the problem along. New building, new principal, new kids, same teacher. I heard that term years ago, and it's been sitting in the back of my head ever since, because it made me ask a question about my own career that I didn't love asking. Am I a lemon? Here's why. My first year, I taught a K-1 combo class. Then I got moved to a third grade to fill an opening. At my next site, there was an opening for third grade and for kinder, and I got put in kinder. By the time I left that site, I was teaching first grade, and the site that I was moving to had an opening for first and for third, and they put me in third, and then I got moved to sixth. So 5 grade levels, 5 different sites, a handful of years, and for a long time I didn't know what that pattern meant about me or about my teaching. It just felt like a lot. And tonight, I want to work through that and what that actually means when a teacher gets moved around a lot. How to tell the difference between the two very different reasons that might happen. And a real story from my years as an instructional coach that forced me to sit with a version of this question I didn't have a comfortable answer for. So here we go. Let's start with the term, because I know not everybody's seen the film or heard it before. The Dance of the Lemons. Here's what it actually means precisely. It's not just a teacher who moves around a lot. It's a specific maneuver. A principal has a teacher who's underperforming, but for whatever reason, hard to formally deal with. Maybe tenure protections, thin documentation, a union process that makes walking through very difficult and very time consuming. So instead of building a case, the principal just quietly helps that teacher transfer to a different school, a different building. A paper trail doesn't follow, and the receiving principal often has no idea what they're inheriting. That's at least one version of it. But sometimes the dance happens without anyone ever leaving the building. Sometimes the principal wants a teacher to want to leave. So instead of a transfer, they'll hand that teacher maybe a combo class. Or maybe they'll move them somewhere jarring on purpose. You might have a third grade teacher who's been in third grade forever, and then all of a sudden they're in 7th grade. Nothing on paper says we're pushing you out. It's just like this quiet, uncomfortable feeling that gets teachers to start looking somewhere else. That's the lemon. Now, here's the term my husband coined. I was telling him about this teacher I was coaching and how she was doing a pretty darn good job in every single grade she landed in. Every grade I coached her through. And actually, I told her at one point that her trajectory reminded me a lot of my own, because I had been moved around a lot myself. And that's when I told my husband that she's not a lemon. And he said, that's a utility knife. A teacher who's good enough and flexible enough that they become the default answer whenever a school has a hole to fix. Not because anyone's trying to get rid of them, because they trust them. So how do you actually tell the difference? Well, okay. So I built this little framework for myself to walk through my own history, and I think it might hold up. So there's 4 questions. Question 1. Is the move pull-driven or push-driven? Is there an opening that needs to be filled, which is a pull, Or is there a problem that needs to disappear? A push. Every move in my career was tied to an opening. None of them was tied to an incident. So, pool. All right. Question 2. Same school or new school? The dance of the lemons almost always moves the teacher to a different building. I mean, that's the whole point. Get the problem out of your building. Get them out of your school, out of your site. A utility knife usually moves around within the same site or gets recruited by name to a new site because somebody specifically wants them there. Okay, I was never pushed out of a school. Anytime I left, it was my choice. I was always moved around in the same school, so question number 2, thumbs up. Question number 3, is the range widening or is it repeating? Okay, hear me out. From my experience, a lemon tends to get recycled into the same kind of low exposure slot over and over. Sometimes, usually something small, self-contained. It's great if there's fewer parents complaining. But a utility knife's range actually widens. This is a person who will kind of do the K3 range. You'll kind of see them do a range, or maybe a 3rd through 6th grade range. And nobody's going to park a struggling teacher across that much range, because the classroom management and the content demands are completely different at each grade level. And if you're struggling, you just can't hang. All right, so for myself, I was kind of the K3 range. I did 6th grade because I was trying to get into that district, and then I moved back down to 1st grade. But yeah, I kind of have a range. So, question number 3, thumbs up. Question 4, my last question. What direction is the movement? Forward or sideways? This one matters a lot. And I'm going to come back to it with a real example. Okay, sideways movement. Same grade. Different building. That smells more like disposal. Forward movement is that you keep creeping towards harder. Now hear me out. Not towards a higher grade, just harder. You're getting more exposed to different assignments. This smells like trust. So you might be a teacher who started maybe in 4th grade, but you have really good classroom management. So you start slowly creeping towards 6th grade because maybe that's where you're seeing that you're needed. Or maybe you're a 3rd grade teacher and you slowly start creeping in the opposite direction towards 1st grade or kindergarten, because maybe your early literacy skills are needed in that direction. So is your direction forward or is it just sideways? Or you're kind of just being stuck and you just that's your grade. So anyways, run through your own history with those 4 questions and you'll know pretty fast which one you're looking at. So here's where this stops being theoretical for me. Years ago when I started coaching, I met a teacher during new teacher orientation. I was going to be her instructional coach at her site, and something about her reminded me of myself. And I couldn't have told you at the moment why. There was just something there. And then I watched her trajectory happen. I'm still watching it happen in real time. She started off in 4th grade, then she was moved to 5th grade. Then she was moved to 6th grade, and I believe she ended up doing a combo. Then she was moved to middle school. You guys see what's happening here? And now she's the intervention teacher. She's been a teacher a total of 7 years. She's going into her 8th, and her first year and a half was COVID. So if I run her through my 4 questions, every move was pull driven. An opening, not an incident. She stayed at the same site through most of it. Her range didn't just widen, she was climbing from upper elementary into middle school. And having worked with her, I can see why that happened. And the direction wasn't just forward. The direction was forward, not just sideways. Each move kind of pulled her closer to the edge of the building where she needed to be. And then there's intervention. I want to sit on that for a second because I think people who haven't worked in a school might not realize what that assignment actually is. Intervention is not where you park a weak teacher. At least not if you're a good principal. If you're putting your weak teacher there, you're doing it wrong. Because intervention is arguably the hardest room at any site. You're accountable for measurable growth on kids who have already failed to grow through the normal method once. There's no room in that role for someone who's still finding their footing. If a principal trusts you with intervention, that's not a demotion. That's the highest vote of confidence the building has to give. So when I look at her story, and then I look at my own story sitting right next to it, the K1, the 3rd, the kinder, the 1st, the 3rd, the 6th, the 1st, I think I finally have my answer. I wasn't being moved around because I was expendable. I was being moved around because I was trusted with uncertainty. That's the cost of being a utility knife, by the way. And I don't want to gloss that over. Because when you're a utility knife, you rarely get the stability to build the kind of single grade mastery that gets publicly recognized. Never, ever have I been the best 3rd grade teacher in a district, the best 1st grade teacher in a district, the best 6th grade teacher in a district, because I've just never been in one place long enough for that reputation to calcify. When you're a utility knife, your skills show up as instructional trust. It almost never shows up as a title. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because when I left the classroom and became an instructional coach, I started being in the room for conversations teachers never hear. And I'll say the quiet part out loud. Yes. Have I worked with teachers whose classrooms I would not put my own children in? 100%. That's not evasion. That's the actual mechanism that makes coaching work. Coaching only functions if the teacher believes you're in their corner unconditionally. That what happens in a coaching conversation stays in that conversation. That you're not quietly feeding information to an evaluator. The second a teacher suspects their coach might be asked, "So what do you think of her?" in a principal's office, that trust is gone. Even if you say nothing damaging. Even if you're never actually asked that. And admins do ask. Because I'm in the room more than any evaluator is. I see instruction unfiltered. I know things a formal evaluation structurally can't assess. That's exactly what makes the question so loaded. I'm valuable to them for the same reason it's dangerous for me to answer. So what do I actually do with that gap? I take the judgment I'm holding, sometimes, something as clear as, I wouldn't put my own kid in that room, and I translate it into something growth-facing instead of diagnostic. Maybe a next step, not a verdict, and that's the whole job, honestly. Holding what I see and never handing it over as a ranking. But I want to tell you about the one time I broke my own rule. Let's call this teacher Joe. Same site as the utility knife teacher from earlier. Let's call her Ace. Joe and Ace. Same building, same window of time, two completely different trajectories. I want to be fair to Joe here because he wasn't coasting. I wasn't the only coach he was working with. He reached out to other coworkers, other coaches, anyone who might have an idea that would help him. He really was trying. It just wasn't landing. Whatever the gap was, nothing any of us offered seemed to close it. And eventually, I did something I don't normally do. I went to admin and I asked directly, why is this person still here? And I got an answer I never fully understood or that I'd been able to sit with. My admin looked at me and said, "This is the evil I know." I understand the logic behind that sentence, but here's what I can't let go of. Let's do actual math on Joe, not a hypothetical. He was teaching a grade level that ran at about 25 students per year. I worked with him for at least 2 years. I've been away from that site for 2 years. That's a minimum of 4 years. At 25 kids a year, at least 100 students who've come through that room. And that's just the beginning. Because as far as I know, he's still there. And he's probably still going to stay there. 100 kids minimum and counting. Say the evil I know once in a quiet office about one person. It sounds modest. Cautious even. But when you multiply it across a career, it stops sounding modest. All right, I want to end tonight with that number because it's the thing I can't actually shake. At least 100 kids. And that's just Joe. Just in the years that I personally witnessed. And just with one teacher in one building. And I've sat in that room and I've heard reasons behind the evil I know. And I understand it. But say it with the number attached and it stops sounding cautious. And it starts sounding like we've decided 100 kids. We're okay with that. I spent years as a coach, and I want to be honest about something. I tried with everybody. That's the job. Not to judge, but to grow people. Meet them exactly where they are and find the next step. Most of the time, that worked. But I can think of one teacher where it didn't. And no matter how many times I tried, and eventually I had to ask directly, why is this person still here? And I got my answer. It didn't sit right with me then, and it doesn't sit right with me still. So maybe the real question isn't who's a lemon and who's a utility knife. Maybe it's this. Are we creating some of our own lemons by protecting people from the exact pressure that builds someone into a utility knife? I don't have a clean answer for that. But I know a number. And I know I couldn't coach everyone into what they needed. And I know that I once asked a question out loud. And that I didn't like the answer that I got. And that's where I'm leaving this one. Not tied up, just there. So I'm leaving you with a question to sit on. And I'd like to hear your answer. Think about your own school, your own career. Do you know a utility knife? Do you know a Joe? And if you do, has anyone ever actually said the quiet part out loud? Or is everyone just quietly doing the math in their head? Anyways, leave me your comments. And if this episode meant something to you, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. This is the end, and I hope you enjoyed another episode of the Veteran Teacher Files. I'm the Dragon Lady, and I'll talk to you next time.